The Invisible Disabilities Association proudly presents the Invisible No More podcast, the podcast that highlights new technologies and conversations that matter for people living with invisible disabilities. Join us on today's show as we speak with Dr. David Singh from Vivos Life, the inspirational speaker John O'Leary, and now join us with our founder and CEO Wayne Cannell as he speaks with the folks from Allsup.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Wayne Cannell, the founder of the Invisible Disabilities Association, and this is the Invisible No More show. We want to welcome today Brett Buchanan from Allsup. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to find out, I understand that Allsup has a veterans passion, and so I wanted to find a little bit about you and maybe a little bit about Allsup and their ability to talk to veterans and their impact on them.
Sure. Well, a little bit about myself. I went to school up in Missouri, Truman State, and at that time I joined Army ROTC and graduated and went active duty Army, and I was in the Army for about 4.5 years and got out and came back home to St. Louis, Missouri, and then went to law school. When I was in law school, I found out the law had changed and really opened up the window for representation when it comes to veterans. So when I say that, the VA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, administers a disability program for veterans called VA compensation, or a lot of veterans call it service-connected disability. And up to about 2006, that representation was really limited to more a pro bono representation. And the law changed in 2006, 2007, where it opened it up for more paid representation, and which just wasn't available before.
It's in regards to their benefits, right?
Correct.
Not getting benefits?
Correct. So the way it works is the veteran will file a claim with the VA, and the basis of the claim, the way the system works is the veteran says, I have a disability today that I feel is related to my time in service. And that criteria has to be met in order for the claim to be granted. Having a disability alone isn't enough, and being in service isn't enough.
So, I know some veterans, they're actually discharged for disability, and there's different levels of disability.
Correct.
So is this for somebody that their disability was not necessarily, they weren't labeled as disably discharged?
Correct. Yeah, it's the bulk of our veterans that we help are veterans that were in and something happened to them, whether an injury or a disease manifested that went undiagnosed, or an event happened to them that had a delayed effect, whether that's an exposure to a chemical or exposure to trauma. Those are the two big ones. And what happens is the veteran gets out, and 4, 5, 6 years later, they really realize, hey, this is a condition that's not going away. It's getting worse. And my doctors are telling me that I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. And so that's when it kind of, and you got to remember too, a lot of these veterans are young. They go in at 18, 19 years old. If you do 4 years, you're coming out at 22, 23. And the understanding of your body at that time frame of your life is just, you think you're invincible, you think things are going to get better, and you just don't know that what you're dealing with is a chronic disability. So they're filing often years later and trying to say, hey, I have this thing today, and I feel it's related to this thing that happened to me in service.
So you came on board with Allsup in what year?
In 2012. I was doing veteran representation before then, and Allsup wanted to start a veterans representation group. And so I came aboard and get that group started, and we started taking veterans in our to assist them for representation in middle to late 2012, and really opened up the service in 2013.
So go into a little more details what takes place, right?
Sure.
So a veteran reaches out to you, I would guess, how do they do that? How do they get a hold of you?
Sure. So they can, reach out to us at veterans.allsup.com is our specific kind of website, but allsup.com as well, and through that website and through other referrals, they can get to us. And where we kind of specialize in is the appeal process. Filing new claims is in itself, it's not difficult, but there is a challenge there. But there's plenty of opportunity and services out there that assist veterans getting that initial application in. And from there, there's not much involvement on the veteran's side. The VA is going to process the claim and tell the veteran yes or no. What we deal with is the appeal process, which
When
is...
they say no.
Correct. So the veteran gets an answer that they're one to disagree with. There's an appeal process within the agency. And it can be very overwhelming and confusing. And so when I started this at Allsup, what was happening at that time was a huge backlog was starting to grow. And it was a wave of claims that really started a couple years prior, were getting denied, and now everyone's appealing. And it was really breaking the system.
Well, and the people, right? I mean,
Correct.
think about it. That's the most important
Absolutely.
part of it is that what happens if you're not getting benefits and you need those benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a double whammy because what happens a lot too with VA, VA splits between benefits and healthcare. And so we deal pretty much exclusively with the benefits side and, again, the compensation side. But getting benefits established will sometimes open those doors for the healthcare side as well. So when the benefit's getting denied, then unfortunately the VA Medical Center is maybe not able to accommodate that veteran. Okay, so not only getting the monetary benefit established is helpful, but then now that veteran has access to health care that maybe they didn't previously have. So it's a huge benefit to get that claim granted, to get that appeal granted.
So they get a hold of you, and what's the next step?
So the next steps, they contact us. At that point, what we do is we step in when they've already kind of gotten denied. So we ask them to send us a copy of their decision. And then they talk to me or they talk to someone in my department, and we go through that decision kind of line by line and really find out what that veteran's story is. Because up to this point, quite frankly, no one from the VA has talked to them directly about their claim. And so we'll get the backstory, we'll understand, and with our experience and knowledge, we'll kind of identify where we think it's deficient. And it's usually, a lot of times the VA may not have all the information they need. And so they're just not going to make the proper decision if they don't have it.
Right.
And so we identify that. And then there's an appeal process now that just started this year that we're very excited about, giving us and the veteran different options on the appeal. And but you have to know why it's getting denied in order to know what option to take. And so that's where we feel that this new appeal process is going to be very helpful, but it also adds a bit of a layer of a complication for everybody. Because if you don't know why you're getting denied, then you may not be able to choose the best option for you.
Right.
And every case is different. There is no blanket answer right now for this because, you could get veteran number one could be being denied for one reason, and so this option would better suit him or her. But veteran number two could almost have the same disability, but their denial is for a whole other reason.
Right.
And so option 2 or 3 may be better for them. And so that's why it's very difficult just to give a canned answer on this new appeals system. And our interview and our review of their file is what gives them guidance on how to do that. And so what we do is we file the proper appeals for them. There are optional hearings in this process, and we give a recommendation if we think a hearing is going to be helpful for their case or not. In general, hearings can slow down the process, but if the hearing is going to increase the odds of that case getting granted, then we give that recommendation. We attend the hearing with the veteran, and we continue to submit evidence on their behalf, advocate on their behalf, so that my phrase is so that your next decision is your last decision. It's the one that gets you there.
Right.
Yeah.
So what makes Allsup unique on that versus, I know there's attorneys that do similar, I've heard about there. So.
Yeah. So where we're unique is that we represent veterans across the country. So our caseload is across the country, where some representatives may just be kind of constrained geographically.
Right.
We have a lot of resources at collecting information because we do this type similar work on the Social Security disability side as well. So a lot of that infrastructure and process is the same in that sense. And so we have those resources to bring to the table.
So that brings a breadth of experience you might not get at other places, right?
Correct. Yes. And but at the same time, within the VA department, we do our best to keep it personal. I talk to the clients that I represent directly often because this is a disability system where you need to talk to the veteran, and because they're the subject matter expert on this. That's what I tell them. You know,
Right,
I'm like,
you gotta believe them, right?
Yeah, you were there, I wasn't.
Exactly
You know,
right.
the VA wasn't. You know, the doctor wasn't. You were there, not me, not us. And so, and you really got to pull from them what the crucial details that they may think are not important, and sometimes are. And get that and bring that to the table and present it to the VA so that they understand that the claim needs to be granted.
So what's the time frame? How long does this take? I know this stuff takes a long time. But
It does, and that's a great question, and it's very difficult to answer right now because we have a mixture of things going on. So when I started here at Allsup in 2012, these were the averages at that time. New claims were taken on an average of a year. If you appealed it, you were looking at a 2 to 3 year wait to decision maker number 2. If you appealed that decision, you're looking at a 3 to 4 year wait to decision maker number 3.
6 years or something?
You will hear veterans say, my appeal has been pending for 7 to 10 years. Oh. And there is a truth to that.
That just breaks my heart.
That's been our biggest challenge. It's just how long it's taken, and not just us. When I say our, the veteran as well. VA knew, Congress knew, everyone knew that the system was unsustainable. Right. They passed legislation about 2 years ago. It went into effect early this year, and now we have some new options. VA's goals on these new options are some of the options they want to get done, and we are seeing these results, and we're very happy about this. Some of these options, their goal is 125 days. Right. From decision maker to decision maker. That's fantastic. Other goals they have are a year to 2 years. Well, that's a long time. What we've been working with, that's very fast in our world, and we're very excited about that.
So tell me about a success story.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to tell me a person. I
sure,
know that's
sure,
okay. But tell me,
sure.
Tell me what it means to a veteran that, oh my goodness, the appeal goes through, and you guys are able to celebrate that.
Correct. Some of our good success stories are these cases where it's it kind of fits with the work you do with the invisible disabilities. A lot of the Vietnam era veterans were exposed to Agent Orange herbicide, okay? And that leads to issues like diabetes, Parkinson's, ischemic heart disease, issues like that, various cancers. And not only that, but a lot of these Vietnam veterans were exposed to combat. So now we're dealing with PTSD and other trauma-related psychological disorders. So what happens is that group of veterans, we had some challenges where maybe their service records didn't really reflect that they were in Vietnam. They went there on temporary duty or what have you. And so we've won a good number of cases that show that they were exposed to Agent Orange and that their condition that they have today is related, or that their PTSD is related to their experience in the military as well. Along with that, another batch of cases that I'm very proud of are our military sexual trauma cases. Right. Military sexual trauma is an issue in the armed forces, and it's not just females, it's males as well. And in fact, the VA and the Department of Defense have put out just raw numbers. There's a larger number of males that have suffered military sexual trauma than females. And that's partly because the bulk of the military is male. So even though the percentage may be smaller, the overall numbers. And so those are very rewarding.
So the
cases.
exciting, right. So the end goal is that these people now actually have an opportunity to get some help.
Absolutely.
Some support that they've been having to live with whatever they're dealing with for
Correct.
years.
Correct.
And finally, it sounds like Allsup comes along and says, we believe you. Right, this is what Invisible Disabilities is about.
Yes.
We're about believing the person, like you said. It's not what the doctor says. It's not what these people, it's like they're the persons that have had to live with it and go through it.
Exactly. And the validation that the veteran gets, when that claim is granted, when the VA says, you know what, there's enough evidence now. We are granting it. This happened to you in the military. Right. You have this today. We're saying the two are related, and we're going to try to get you to a better place. That validation is very rewarding.
So as we wrap this up, what would be one or two things you could say to the veteran, right, who's going through this? What would you say that from an encouraging standpoint to them?
So number one would be is don't give up. If it happened to you, we have seen claims get granted when they've been denied before. And there's a number of issues why it may have been denied, but those are usually correctable, or there's VA regulations in place to get you there. Number two is seek help, not just obviously come to Allsup and see if we can help you out with your VA claim, VA appeal, but seek help with your medical providers, because these claims are won on medical evidence, and you need to seek treatment with the purpose of getting better, and really try to do your best to advocate for yourself, and that can be challenging, but pull in the family members that you have and the friends that you have to help you with that.
Well, and it sounds like Allsup's a great friend as well.
Absolutely.
To come alongside,
Yeah.
I really appreciate, Brett, what you're doing, and obviously it comes out of a passion yourself as a veteran, and I think it's a great impact that you're making. Nothing's worse than being alone,
right?
And you guys have the opportunity to say you're not alone anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I enjoy it, and this is my career, and I don't see myself doing anything different.
Awesome. So the Invisible No More show, what an amazing opportunity to showcase great companies that are making a difference in people's lives.
So looking back at your own life, have you ever done anything that you now realize was a huge mistake? And if you are even remotely normal, the answer is yes. When I was 9 years old, I took a piece of cardboard, walked into my mom and dad's garage, held it over a can of gasoline, and the plan was to pour a little bit of gasoline, safe amount of course, on top of a burning piece of paper. Before the liquid even came out, the fumes grabbed that flame, pulled it back in, created a massive explosion, and launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, set my world on fire, and changed me forever. And I remember being in the emergency room later that morning on my back, no clothes on, no skin on, laying in the hospital bed with one thought. And for me, the thought was, oh my gosh, my dad is going to freaking kill me when he finds out. My father's going to kill me. He'll be furious. And then I hear his voice down the hall. He's speaking to a nurse, and the question my dad asked was, where's my boy John? Where's my boy John? And I remember being that little boy, hearing the roar of the lion down the hall, thinking, oh my gosh, the old man has come to finish me off. Like, this thing is over. This nurse does me no favor. She brings my father back into the room. He pulls back the curtain. He marches in, shoulders back, walks over to me, points down, and then says words I'll never forget. John, look at me when I'm talking to you. So there's the kiss of death. And then he goes on to say, I have never been so proud of anybody in my entire life. And my little buddy today, this morning, I am just proud to be your dad. And then my father says, I love you. And I love you. I love you. And as he kept saying, I love you, I remember eventually crossing my arms and shutting my eyes thinking, oh my gosh, nobody told my dad what happened. Like, he clearly does not know. I just blew up the house. And yet what I think my father was showing me that day is he knew exactly what happened. He also knew about the power of faith, the power of forgiveness, the power of love, and the power of grace to change someone else's life. And in practicing all of this, he was beginning to change my life. It did not make that day in the emergency room easy. It did not make 5 months in burn care easy. It did not make losing fingers to amputation easy, or 3+ decades that have fallen with some outward scars and also some invisible ones easy. I just think that love and forgiveness and grace he showed made the journey possible. And it changed what happens next. It changed my heart into one that could accept help from others. And help is required when you're going through a difficult time. I certainly needed it myself as a kid. I need it today still as a man. But back then I needed volunteers. I needed blood. I needed healthcare professionals. I needed prayers. We needed money. We needed a house to stay. I needed 24-hour care to guide me through those 5 months. I needed experts in therapy to help me figure out how to hold things with my hands again. I needed all this love, and I was fortunate and humble enough to accept it. I think one of the hardest things for us to do when we recover or move forward in life is the decision to open our minds, our eyes, and our hearts wide enough to accept help. And I have been on this journey since age 9 of gratefully saying yes when people offer to extend a hand. It changed what happened during 5 months in hospital. It changed what happens over a couple years of recovery. It changed what happens as I eventually went back to school, as I eventually found out who I was and whose I was and what I was going to do in my life. And then it changed what happened professionally. After 20 years of recovery, I eventually decided I wanted to tell people my story. The very first group I ever spoke to was not some large theater. It wasn't some huge conference center. It wasn't executives or salespeople. My very first group ever was 3 Girl Scouts in St. Louis County in the 3rd grade. And I was so nervous before I spoke to them that I actually got sick in the parking lot. So there's my courage, there's my strength. But I remember after getting sick in the parking lot, I grabbed my bag, reached for a piece of gum, put it in my mouth, walked away from the car, and walked into the school building. Because I had remembered as a young boy people showing up in my life and the impact that it made on me. And it was my hope that day, in some small way, I might make a difference for some little 3rd grader Girl Scout. Well, the cool thing is one of those girls had a father who was a Rotarian, who invited me to speak. And then the cool thing there is one of the members there was also in Kiwanis, and then he invited me to speak. And then one of those guys ran a small business. And over the last 14 years of saying yes, one by one, first with 3 3rd graders, then to one smaller volunteer organization, we have had the opportunity now of saying yes to more than 2 million people at live speaking events. Have a couple books out there that have traveled around the world. One of them is called On Fire. It's been translated into 16 languages. Another one is called In Awe. It's just been published. We're blessed. We're fortunate. We recognize how much we have to be grateful for, but I think primarily the reason we have that is because of a father's love. A decision that my dad made 32 years ago when he was scared out of his mind, walking to his dying son with no skin on, instead of judging and showing up with anger or fear to show up in love. It changed my life. And I'm utterly convinced that that same decision to show up in your day and into the days of those that you serve and love will change not only their lives, but also yours. I'm John O'Leary, and that's my story.
Vivos has developed some interesting technology. It's a suite of devices. And this family of devices, what they're actually doing is targeting sleep disordered breathing and specifically sleep apnea. And the way these devices work is they're going to be able to remodel and redevelop the upper airway. And so we know the upper airway is behind the jaws, and so attached to the jaws are the teeth. And so these devices are going to be worn inside the mouth before and during sleep. And the idea is to remodel, redevelop the upper airway and enhance breathing and allow this patient to sleep like a regular person without wearing anything in their mouth for the rest of their life. The common term is sleep apnea, but actually it's part of a broader spectrum. And we'll call that sleep disordered breathing as a kind of overall umbrella term, because it can be very mild or it can be very severe. So let's take the very mild option. Typically in children, it would be upper airway resistance syndrome, UARS. And so there's just a resistance to breathing. Maybe the nose is blocked, the nose obstructed, maybe this child is mouth breathing. Typically that's how they present. Now if that's left untreated, that patient can have snoring classically, and that snoring can lead to mild sleep apnea. So let's say you've got a younger patient here, and they may have some snoring issues, they may have a mild sleep apnea, but what happens over a period of time, particularly if that patient gets heavier, puts on a bit of weight, and if they become obese, suddenly that mild sleep apnea becomes moderate or even severe sleep apnea. And so here we have a spectrum of disorders. And so what we want to do is, number one is screening to say that, are you at risk? Number two, if you are at risk, let's do a test to find out, are you mild, are you moderate, is it severe? And once we know the diagnosis there, we can start to address the underlying condition. Now, the interesting thing about sleep apnea is that it has comorbidities. Left untreated, what we know now is that things like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular problems, stroke, dementia, you can go on and on. There's a whole bunch of chronic diseases which are thoroughly associated with sleep apnea. So If you can address the underlying sleep apnea, those other conditions may also be addressed, eliminated, and corrected, or at least reduced in severity. So for example, let's take a serious condition like stroke. If you are able to get the sleep apnea under control, maybe if the stroke occurs, it will be less severe, maybe it'll occur at a later date, and if you're lucky, it might be eliminated. And so the neurologists are very interested in looking at the impact of sleep health on, other parts of the body in terms of systemic health. Same with the cardiologists. They're looking at what's the impact of sleep apnea on cardiovascular health, the risks of having a heart attack if this sleep apnea is not addressed early on. These devices that we have are really trying to target the stem cells and change the structure and the form, of the face and the jaws. And those changes can be described as being epigenetic. So what we know is that the genes that you inherit, the genes that you were born with, the genes that you keep for life, are going to give you, facial structure and facial tissues. But the interesting thing is by using an epigenetic approach, we can start to modify those structures. And so without using drugs, without using surgery, here we are able to get these variations in the phenotype. So let's say you had a narrow jaw, that's a phenotype, and we get able to expand that jaw, make it broader. Now we just change the phenotype. We've got phenotypic variation. And the way we've done that is through an epigenetic response. So the human genome has been sequenced. We've known that since 2003. But what we realize now is surrounding those genes is another layer, which is the epigenome. And so what we're able to do is use signals from the environment, and those could be physical signals or they could be part of the diet, to produce an epigenetic response. And what that actually does, it changes the outcome. It enhances the outcome. And so part of this approach is a little bit like reaching your genetic potential, being the best version of yourself. This is quite an important, significant approach to take. The reason is because in the modern society, we have a high healthcare cost. We have a lot of people who are suffering from chronic conditions. Some of these conditions are actually new in terms of human history. Let's take multiple sclerosis, let's take Parkinson's, for examples. These conditions, they weren't prevalent, hundreds of years ago. And so the importance of the approach here is that let's see if we can target some of these modern and common diseases, but we're going to take an indirect approach. The indirect approach is based on the fact that we want to have a healthy airway, get these patients breathing through their nose, and allow them to sleep like regular people. And so the importance of this is that other chronic conditions, diabetes, we mentioned multiple sclerosis, obesity, we can go on and on in terms of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, strokes. All of these are related to airway and sleep health. And so it's very important for us to saying, let's get on the first level, on the ground level, and really give the body a firm foundation for health and longevity. So this is why it's so important for us to say, let's get down to the root causes of these conditions, because yes, I can treat hypertension with drugs, but that will be for the rest of your life. Is it possible for us to address the underlying sleep and breathing so the reliance on drugs for hypertension is reduced, and if we're lucky, maybe it will be eliminated? And again, it depends on a case-by-case basis for us to do that. So to my mind, this is why it's important to take that approach. Vivos is kind of unique because it's a company which has a very forward-thinking philosophy, thinking here's where we're at now and here's the vision of where we want to be in the future. And so Vivos is on a very important mission because what they've done is looked at how did we arrive at this common modern level of health. Okay, and so what we know from the literature is some of the children who are being born now are less healthy than the previous generation. What we also know is the lifespan is slightly shorter now than it was a generation ago. So in a way, human health is going in the wrong direction. And so Vivos realized that what we did in the past has precipitated what we have now. And the mission is to saying, let's see if we can prevent this from worsening in the future. And our mission is to saying, let's see how we can improve human health in the future. And so that's what makes kind of Vivos unique in their approach. It's the vision that they have of eradicating a disease which we feel is within our grasp. It's the technology is there. Of course, studies will go on to show all the details that are involved. But Vivos has this vision of actually taking this disease process and trying to eliminate it or reducing it down to a very manageable level. The question is, has this ever been done before in history? And the answer is yes. It's down to the scientific approach. It's down to the evidence that we found. And we can test and improve the protocol. But the example I would give you is vaccinations, or that kind of idea of preventing a disease, and so it doesn't reoccur, And so there are examples where we've taken conditions that were afflictions on humans in the past, and which now no longer exist, or they have been minimized. And so Vivos has the approach of saying, okay, let's take airway, breathing, sleep disordered breathing, and let's see if we can control it, eliminate it, reduce it down to very manageable levels. And that's the philosophy that they're taking. That's the mission that they're on. They have this broad worldwide vision. And the people who are working with Vivos, they are experts at what they do. They are passionate about what they do. And they want to share that passion with people that they know and they meet, and spread out, the message that there's hope for people who have these kind of airway and breathing and sleeping issues. The interesting thing about the Vivos system is that it's not really restricted by age. And the reason for that is that we're really targeting a epigenetic mechanism. And so the genes that you're born with is the genes that you're going to keep, and we're going to try to see if we can work with that mechanism. So the devices can be worn by someone as young as, let's say, 3 or 4 years old. And they have been worn by people who are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. So, the fact is that you have these stem cells throughout the body, and if we can target those, then we can get some responses and some changes. And so, the early studies that we did, these were in newborn babies. And so these were children who were born with facial defects. But now these devices are designed to be actually worn within the mouth. And so we need teeth, and so healthy teeth and healthy gums. And so typically a child of the age of about 3, 4, 5, they can start to wear these devices. They're not uncomfortable to wear, they're quite comfortable to wear. And they don't need to be worn 24/7. You can take the device out. Now, that protocol, that approach is called biomimetics. And so we're going to mimic nature. So these really are biomimetic devices. So we're going to tend to copy and replicate the way the body normally grows and develops. And what we know is that what the genes give us is a blueprint. The blueprint saying you're going to have a symmetrical face with 32 teeth. And so the idea with these devices is to see, can we replicate that natural model that we've inherited? Because that natural model gives you, good function, keeps you healthy. And so that's part of the philosophy of the Vivos system.